Before we dive into the main topic, please take a moment to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, like this podcast, and leave a comment to support the channel. Your engagement truly helps.
It really does. So let's get into it.
Welcome to The Debate. Today, we are immersing ourselves in a really fundamental philosophical challenge. It's often referred to as Popper's dilemma, and it sits right at the heart of what it means to maintain an open society.
Right, the paradox of tolerance.
Exactly. It's a foundational dispute that forces a confrontation between two fiercely held commitments. Specifically, how does a liberal, a tolerant society protect unfettered free expression while, at the same time, managing the risk that unlimited tolerance gives fertile ground for intolerant forces to grow, to organize, and, well, eventually destroy the very framework of tolerance itself? It's an acute collision of values.
And that collision is precisely what makes it so agonizing. The challenge, then, isn't just to, acknowledge the conflict. It's to find a mechanism for definitive action. This paradox, it consistently leaves people feeling torn, uncertain of how to proceed without breaching a core principle.
Indeed. And the central question we're confronting today is intensely practical. When you're facing this critical juncture, what intellectual mechanism is most essential for moving beyond that state of agonizing uncertainty? Is the path forward secured through meticulous, exhaustive reasoning and careful deliberation? Or does the resolution require the decisive clarity that's provided by intuition? I'll be making the case that rigorous, structured analysis and strategic foresight are really the only necessary tools for resolving this problem.
And I come at it from a fundamentally different perspective. While, look, no one denies the necessity of some initial analysis, I'm going to argue that pure logic, when it's faced with such mutually exclusive values, often it reaches an epistemic limit. Intuition, and I mean wise intuition, is required to break the cycle of analytical paralysis and finally move a society toward decisive, confident action. You could say logic defines the bind, but it's intuition that cuts the knot.
My core position rests on the complexity of the threat itself. Resolving this dilemma demands careful, structured deliberation, meticulous reasoning, and a willingness to weigh options with exceptional mental sharpness and agility. When you're dealing with existential threats to tolerance, this is so much more than just an academic exercise. It requires a detailed, holistic approach to strategy. The process of deep reflection and analysis concerning such profound conflicts, well, that's what builds the conceptual tools necessary for statecraft. It strengthens our ability to strategize against ideological creep, to evaluate what is a relevant threat versus what's just irrelevant noise, and, critically, to determine actions that are truly aligned with the survival of our principles. Failing to engage in this structured analysis risks decisions that are reactive, fear-driven, and ultimately unsustainable. And that is the very mechanism by which intolerance wins.
Okay, I recognize the necessity of those conceptual tools, I do. But I would argue that your focus on endless deliberation inadvertently defines the problem. The paradox of tolerance is tormenting precisely because the more fiercely we try to reason our way out, the more options we weigh, the deeper that sense of being torn becomes. The attempt to achieve absolute intellectual clarity about this dilemma, it often proves exhausting. You get rumination, overthinking, relentless self-questioning, and it all holds us back. It generates this acute collective paralysis exactly when swift intervention is what's needed. So I don't accept the premise that pure sequential logic will consistently save us from this particular ethical bind. After rigorous analysis has laid out the conflicting options, which I agree is vital, it is that moment of intuitive clarity, that sudden synthesis of all the data, that leaves one feeling decisive rather than just hesitant. It allows a society to commit to a course of action that it can defend with conviction, finally escaping that intellectual stagnation. The human need for distance, a good night's sleep, a reset mind that allows us to return to difficult questions, that strongly suggests that the decisive break from pure analysis is the essential key.
I appreciate you recognizing that analysis is vital, but I do worry about the consequences of relying on intuition as the primary mechanism of resolution. If we elevate the intuitive leap to this essential status, we risk substituting careful, multi-stage strategy for what might just be a gut feeling. And that feeling, while it offers the relief of decisiveness, may be fundamentally flawed or based on an incomplete assessment of the second-order effects.
But the historical risk of prioritizing only meticulous reasoning is that it becomes perpetual doubt. If the analysis simply generates the conflict, that feeling of being torn between two opposite compelling directions, then the analysis alone cannot be the sole solution. It just can't. We need a cognitive instrument designed to synthesize and commit. We need intuition to provide that decisive step, allowing us to break free from the conceptual trap that exhaustive reasoning has set for us. I mean, what's the practical utility of perfect knowledge of the paradox if it only leads to political and social inaction?
To clarify the distinction, though, the conceptual tools we rely on, mental agility, strategic modeling, risk evaluation, all of them absolutely presuppose and require a rigorous foundation of structured analysis. The premise that intuition breaks the cycle is valid only if that intuition has been rigorously educated. How can a sudden, intuitive determination accurately define the ethical boundary between protected speech and dangerous incitement if that line hasn't been rigorously educated and defined by careful deliberation in the first place? To advocate for intuition as the braking mechanism risks simplifying what has to be a deeply complex, detail-oriented strategic process. History shows us that hesitation, which is often the paralyzing result of overanalysis, enables destructive forces to grow stronger, faster than democratic institutions can respond. The necessity is not to abandon structured analysis for a leap of faith, but to conduct reasoned, timely analysis that translates directly into proactive, institutional strategy that prevents the need for an intuitive Hail Mary pass later on.
The problem is that the paralysis is a real, documented phenomenon. It's a cognitive dissonance that drains the will to act. We agree that failing to act is a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It allows extremism to flourish. So if comprehensive analysis only exacerbates the sense of being torn, if it creates this moral discomfort that leads to societal inertia, then the mechanism for action must originate in a synthesizing step that moves beyond just data interpretation to a firm ethical commitment. And that is the realm where holistic processing has to succeed sequential logic.
Well, that brings us directly to the practical implications of Popper's warning, which, history has confirmed countless times. He asserted very clearly that if a society is tolerant without limits, its ability to remain tolerant will eventually collapse under external pressure. You just have to look at the historical record. The failures of the Weimar Republic, for example. They illustrate the devastating consequences when a well-meaning, highly analytical democracy treats the early signs of anti-democratic extremist growth too lightly. That failure was not a failure of passion, it was a failure of reasoned, strategic observation and a subsequent failure to make a principled decision to act when certain forms of intolerance manipulated freedoms to systematically silence opposing voices. The resolution, therefore, it has to be reasoned and prophylactic. We must carefully model how intolerance exploits openness, how it weaponizes the democratic process, and that demands methodical, careful deliberation, not a sudden, intuitive jump. I wholeheartedly agree with the gravity of Popper's diagnosis, and yes, the Weimar example is a chilling testament to the dangers of inaction. But the fundamental question remains, why didn't the analysis translate into timely political will? The intellectual clarity was often there, yet the moral collision left key leaders feeling profoundly torn. And that feeling, the agonizing uncertainty, is not solved by more analysis. It's solved by commitment. Intellectual clarity about the paradox doesn't seamlessly transform into decisive action until intuition allows the polity to finally, break free from the fear of violating a principle and opt for the least harmful course of action with genuine political confidence. The sheer mental pain and agony described when confronting this paradox suggests a clear limit to what pure sequential logic can achieve. You speak of the psychological pain, but I am focused on the strategic outcome. I'm not convinced that this shift from analytical torment to action is truly intuition operating as a decision generator. It sounds more like a psychological coping mechanism to achieve commitment when the logical inputs are, evenly balanced. This is precisely why meticulous reasoning remains the essential tool. The strategic imperative is to ensure the logical inputs are not evenly balanced by proactively modeling the long-term dangers.
But you define intuition as a coping mechanism. I see it as a necessary cognitive integration tool. Let's look at concrete policy outcomes. Societies that prioritize an absolute, purely rational adherence to free speech principles, like the interpretation often adopted in the United States, they tend to find themselves trapped in perpetual debates about where the line is drawn, often paralyzed until the threat is existential. Conversely, societies that have built constitutional systems based on a profound, almost intuitive political commitment to historical trauma, like Germany's approach to hate speech and anti-constitutional parties, they tend to act decisively and preemptively. Their intuition, informed by history, is built right into their legal frameworks, allowing them to bypass that philosophical circularity you're describing. This proves that an integrated conviction, not merely ongoing analysis, is the key.
That comparison is revealing, I'll grant you, but I would argue that the German approach isn't based on intuition. It's based on a foundational, meticulously reasoned, and legislatively codified strategy against repeating historical failures. Their basic law is the ultimate expression of careful, structured analysis and strategic foresight, a prophylactic legal framework designed to avoid the very political paralysis of Weimar. It is the definition of reasoning taking precedence over blind tolerance. The policy outcome you cite is the result of deep, historical deliberation, not an intuitive jump.
The decision to place the defense of democracy above the abstract purity of expression, which is the choice their system makes, that is fundamentally a moral and political commitment that moves beyond the pure logical weighting of values. It's the synthesized realization that action, even if it entails a minor principled breach today, is necessary for survival tomorrow. This is where wise intuition steps in. It provides the capacity to return to the question after absorbing all that historical analysis with the renewed energy needed to resolve the dilemma with committed clarity rather than panic. This mental shift, it's what sequential logic, caught in its perpetual loop, often fails to provide.
The distinction, for me, hinges on priority. If intuition can only be wise, as you rightly insist, if it's grounded in the thorough preparation provided by meticulous reasoning, then reasoning remains the primary essential mechanism. The strategy has to be honed first. The careful reflection must define the permissible bounds of engagement, the acceptable level of risk, and the strategic timing. Intuition in this framework, it merely executes the principles that have already been defined through rigorous reflection. Without that rigorous groundwork, well, intuition isn't wise, it's simply a reactive impulse. We must ensure decisions are the result of careful reflection designed to withstand scrutiny, not the product of a momentary flash of decisiveness.
And yet we continuously return to the limit of analysis. We've established that the dilemma is difficult precisely because the rational choice seems to involve an unacceptable violation of one deeply held principle or another. If rigorous reasoning leads to an intractable dead end of doubt, we need a mechanism capable of integrating these competing ethical demands and choosing the least harmful path with conviction. Wise intuition, having processed all the strategic data subconsciously during that reset, provides the critical clarity needed to move from analytical torment to decisive defense.
So I'll maintain that the intellectual and societal defense against intolerance requires constant, structured, strategic work. The complexity of Popper's dilemma, with its ongoing collision of fundamental values, necessitates equipping ourselves with the conceptual tools of structured analysis and meticulous reasoning. This rigorous approach ensures that any course of action taken is justifiable, strategically sound, and defensible against the very forces seeking to undermine tolerance. Strategy defines and protects the principles.
And I still insist that while rigorous analysis is foundational, it absolutely establishes the parameters of the conflict. The profound sense of being torn between these conflicting options demands a distinct cognitive mechanism to overcome that intellectual paralysis. Wise intuition is the tool that allows us to move beyond the cycle of doubt and achieve the decisive clarity needed to resolve the dilemma, shifting the focus from the agony of the conflict to the confidence of the choice.
The core tension, then, it seems to remain. Do we rely on detailed deliberation to define and secure the principles of action, ensuring accountability and foresight? Or do we prioritize a moment of decisive, intuitive synthesis to secure the necessary commitment to act when logic stalls?
And the answer to that likely shapes the very character of a free society, whether it chooses to confront uncomfortable truths fiercely yet responsibly through exhaustive reasoned strategy, or through a necessary integrated leap of faith that's informed by the deepest intellectual preparation. There is certainly a lot here for our listeners to consider about the intertwined role of both paths.
Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, like, and leave a comment to support the channel.